Every night at exactly 3 a.m., I hear footsteps pacing back and forth above my head. And after months of hearing these footsteps, I finally worked up the courage to get up and take a look. It's an old Victorian-style home. The walls are at least 12 inches thick, and it has creaky floorboards throughout the entire house. My bedroom is located on the second floor at the end of a long hallway. There are no other rooms on this floor, and the only other access to my room is through my bathroom. What I saw was not only terrifying, but completely unexpected. That night when I heard the footsteps again, I got up and investigated again. I found another wrapper from the same brand of Kit Kat. But this time, it was the wrapper from the mini version. Once again, I checked everywhere, but there was nothing there. But then, one night, I was awoken in my bed to what sounded like footsteps pacing back and forth in the attic above my room. I walked over and pulled back the curtains. Outside, the wind was blowing hard, and rain was pouring down. I could feel the vibrations in my bones as they stomped back and forth directly above my head. I ran to the window and screamed for help, but my voice wouldn't come out. It was like I was paralyzed with fear. The footsteps were getting louder and more frantic by the second. I begged them to look in the attic, but they just shook their heads and said that there was no way anyone could have gotten in there. Behuse. They told me that my house was old and that settling noises sometimes sounded like footsteps. I went into the attic and began searching for the source of the noise. And when I opened it, the first entry I read sent shivers down my spine. It said, "Today is my birthday. I'm 17 years old." Below that entry, there were several more entries, all written in my name. The last entry said, "I haven't seen him in a while, but I know he'll be back soon. When he comes back, I'll be ready for him." I closed the diary and dropped it to the floor. The footsteps started pounding on the roof again. I ran from the attic, stumbled down the stairs, and locked myself in my bedroom. I found a loose floorboard, and when I lifted it, I saw a small hole in the insulation underneath. I reached inside and pulled out a diary. Maybe it's better that some things are left unknown, but I knew that they were just trying to make me feel better. I could feel the pain in my chest as my heart pounded against my ribs. It was so loud outside that I couldn't hear anything else, but then I heard a knock on the window. The footsteps stopped. The wind outside died down, and the rain slowly came to a halt. I could only point to the window and make strange noises. They followed my gaze and saw the imprint of a hand on the window. One of the officers leaned in and looked outside. Spit. He told me that it looked like a tree branch had fallen onto the window, and that it was probably just my imagination. But I knew that he was lying. I could feel the heat of the hand on the window, even through the glass. I stood there paralyzed, waiting for what felt like an eternity, until I finally regained my voice. I quickly got off the phone and called 911. Within minutes, police cars were swarming my neighborhood. I looked out to see what I thought was a tree branch hitting the glass, but when I got closer, I realized that it was a hand. A pale, lifeless hand with long, sharp nails. It looked like the hand of a corpse. It always sounded like the person or thing up there was getting closer and closer with each passing day. Every night I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, convinced that the footsteps were getting closer and closer. I became so obsessed with the sound that I started recording my audio with my phone every night, hoping to capture the footsteps. But all I ever recorded was silence. I was terrified to go to sleep at night, and I was sick of getting up to find some weird food in my room every single morning. So I decided that I needed to confront whatever was up there in the attic. Whenever I would hear those footsteps, I would get up and investigate, and I would always find a wrapper from the same brand of Kit Kat. Sometimes it would be the full-size bar. Other times it would be the mini version, and once I even found the wrapper from the ice cream version. But it wasn't just the wrappers. Sometimes I would find other things in my room that shouldn't have been there, like pieces of fruit that were unbruised or wilted, and different kinds of candy that were still wrapped in their original packaging. I couldn't make out how many steps there were, or how long each step lasted because of how muffled they sounded. It was a small piece of paper, and when I picked it up, I realized it was a food wrapper from a Kit Kat bar. I can't remember what the dream was about, but I do remember how relieved I was when I realized that the footsteps had woken me up. For the past month, I'd been waking up every morning at 3 a.m. because of the commotion in the attic. But now it was quiet. I got out of bed and walked down the hallway towards my room. I knew that I should just get back into bed, but something was telling me to keep going. But it wasn't just any Kit Kat bar. It was a foreign brand of Kit Kat that isn't sold here in the United States. This didn't make any sense, because I do want to eat Kit Kats, and I am pretty sure that nobody who lives near me has ever even seen this brand of Kit Kat. I remember thinking how strange it was to find a wrapper from a foreign country in my room. But I just figured that someone must have brought it over from another country and left it behind. So I threw the wrapper away and went to bed. But I could tell whoever or whatever was up there was agitated. I lie in bed trying to listen to see if whatever was up there would stop. But 10 minutes went by and the footsteps continued. It all started about 2 months ago when I moved into my new house. Each step I took made me jump, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on. When I reached my bedroom door, I hesitated for a moment before turning the doorknob and opening the door. The footsteps had stopped. I stepped into my room and shut the door behind me. Then I proceeded to check everywhere, under the bed, in the closet, even in between the curtains, but there was nothing there. The first couple of weeks went by without any problem. I decided to get out of bed and investigate. As I walked down the hallway towards my bedroom, I could feel a sense of dread fill my body. I was about to get back into bed when I noticed something strange on the floor. The next morning, I told my wife about the incident, but she just laughed and said that I probably imagined it. Over the next few weeks, I heard the footsteps almost every single night, sometimes multiple times a night. It got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. One night I woke up from a nightmare. When I opened the door to my room, I noticed that the curtains were moving slightly and I could feel a draft coming from somewhere. Suddenly, the footsteps began pounding on the roof. Then everything went silent. When the officers entered my house, they asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't speak. They searched my house from top to bottom, but they didn't find anything. As the days went by, the footsteps continued to haunt my nightmares. One day I decided that enough was enough. I was going to find out once and for all what was making those footsteps. On the cover of the diary was my name. To this day, I still hear those footsteps, but I haven't gone back to check. I knew he was coming for me, but when I turned around, there was no one there. Okay, so this is gonna sound insane, but bear with me here. 3 years ago, my ex-husband and I decided to move from California to Oregon. We were trying to start over after our messy divorce, and we both thought a fresh start in a new state would do us some good. So, we each bought a house in the same small town, not knowing what the other one had planned. Within a week of being there, though, we met these super nice people who invited us to a barbecue. There would be tons of singles there, they said, and it couldn't hurt to meet some new people. But then I started to notice that the woman was touching him a lot. I couldn't believe that Rob would let this woman treat him so casually. I mean, she was practically all over him, and he didn't even seem to care. One minute she was casually resting her hand on his shoulder. "Hi, ma'am," he said. "I'm here to ask you a few questions about a case we're working on." Confused, I stepped aside to let him in. "What case?" I asked. "We just want to ask you a few questions to see if you know anything." Puzzled, I denied knowing anything more. I hadn't seen anyone in my yard, and I definitely didn't know anything about the break-in. And every time I walked outside, I half expected to see someone lurking in the bushes. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard a noise in my backyard. I got out of bed and walked to the window to see what was out there. All I saw was a dark figure running across my lawn. I don't know what it was, but it was big, and it was moving fast. I even started to hear strange noises outside my house at night, like footsteps and whispers. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. He didn't answer my question, but instead gestured for me to sit down at the kitchen table. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. And if you have a scary story you'd like to share, please comment it below. I may feature your story in an upcoming episode. Thanks again for watching. See you soon. Bye. Was she really trying to take Rob away from me? I also wanted to see if I could find any clues about who was in my yard. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were big and deep, like whoever had been in my yard was heavy. I tried to shake the feeling off, but it just wouldn't go away. Startled, I jumped out of bed and ran to hide. They told me that they were reviewing the footage from the security cameras in my neighborhood, and they needed me to come down to the station to watch it. Of course, I was nervous, but I went in anyway. But how did they know when the power would go out? And why did they only cut it for 3 minutes? But I do know that I haven't slept in my own bed since that day. Now, whenever I hear a noise in the middle of the night, I get up and check my windows, half expecting to see that dark figure standing there. No matter how many times I look, I never see anyone. As I peeked through the blinds, I saw a police officer standing on my porch. At first, it was nothing but cars passing by and people walking their dogs. Then, suddenly, the screen went black. What's going on? I asked the officer. He shrugged and said, "We don't know. It just cuts out for 3 minutes." Apparently, someone had gotten in and stolen a bunch of jewelry. I told the officer that I didn't know anything about it, but he didn't seem convinced. I quickly hid again and tried to calm my racing heart. Why were they here? Had someone broken into my house? I tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted. I needed to get some rest, but all I could think about was the previous night. The next, she was running her fingers through his hair. It made me feel sick to my stomach. I don't know why, but it did. I didn't want to be the crazy ex-wife who confronted them, so I just ignored it and tried to have a good time. And honestly, I wasn't opposed to the idea. I mean, I didn't think anything of it at first. It's probably just in my head, I told myself. But then it happened again and again and again. Later that night, though, I started to get a creepy feeling that someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't go away. In fact, it got worse. Every time I caught her smirking at me, she quickly looked away, as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. My husband, Rob, and I hadn't been together for 2 years, and I was definitely looking to move on. Who was this woman, and why was she trying to make me feel uncomfortable? Was she trying to steal Rob from me? He was still technically my husband, so I guess it makes sense, but it scared me that she felt so comfortable invading my personal space. But when I got there, I saw Rob talking to a woman, and I couldn't help but feel like they were flirting. At first, I tried to ignore it. They could just be friends, right? It was difficult, because the entire time I kept seeing the woman look at me and smirk. After a while, it started to freak me out. As the night went on, the woman continued to rub all over him, and he didn't seem to mind at all. I wanted to talk to Rob about it, but every time I tried to get his attention, he just waved me off, which made me even more upset. I ended up going home early, which isn't like me at all. I'm usually the last person standing. I tried to tell myself that it was nothing, that I was just overreacting, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman and her smirks. What did they mean? I finally got to sleep around noon, but I was awoken by a loud bang on my front door. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door, the officer looked at me and smiled. As he began asking me questions, I realized that he was trying to find out if I knew anything about a break-in at my neighbor's house. "You see," he said, "we checked the security footage at your neighbor's house, and it looks like someone entered your yard right before the break-in." The officer left just as abruptly as he'd arrived, and I went about my day, feeling shaken but otherwise fine. Every time I looked out a window, I felt like I was being watched. One night I woke up in the middle of the night to what sounded like screams in the forest. The next morning, I got up and went out back to see if anything was missing. Then, one day, while I was at work, I got a call from the police. When I got there, they showed me the footage from the camera in front of my house. That's when I realized what had happened. The security footage had cut out for exactly 3 minutes, just long enough for someone to get in and out of my house. To this day, I still don't know the answers to those questions. And that's when I remember that the police never found out what happened to me either. Thanks for watching. Do you ever get the willies? Not like when you're a kid and you walk past a graveyard and the trees look like arms reaching out for you, but the willies like someone's watching. You, the kind of willies that makes the hair on your neck stand up and your skin crawl. Well, I got those willies. But it wasn't because I walked past a graveyard. It was because of a phone call. And that's not even the worst part. So let me start from the beginning. My girlfriend and I had been living in our apartment for about a month. We were loving it. I opened it and stuck my head out to see if the breeze had picked up or anything. My usual route was through the park, but there was a 5K fun run downtown that day. So I decided I'd run down the hill toward the river and see where I ended up. After about a mile, I realized I didn't know where I was. I was in a neighborhood I'd never seen before, one that was completely different from the one I lived in. It had to be explained by science. So I figured I must have walked past the spot I started running from. I whipped around, but there was no one there. Hey, are you almost home? Yeah. It's getting late, and I haven't heard you come in. Call me when you get home. Love you. I hurried my pace. I didn't want her to worry. I was probably just some bored guy playing a prank, the officer said. But you should probably change your number. I could have sworn it was ringing, but it wasn't. The phone was dead. I went to hang up the receiver, but it wasn't there. Brew. The cord was wrapped neatly around the base, and the receiver was nowhere to be found. I searched the apartment, but it was no use. The receiver was gone. I checked my phone. There were no missed calls. I checked my voicemail. There were no new messages. I ended the call and slumped onto the floor, my back against the cabinets. I pulled my sweater tighter around me. It was cold, really cold. So I poured myself a hot mug of tea, turned on all the lights, locked the doors and windows, pulled the curtains shut, and went to bed. It wasn't funny. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up again. This time, it wasn't because I was scared. I went to the kitchen to make breakfast, but that draft I'd felt the day before was back. It was cold by the door. Pear. I walked out into the hallway and pushed the door open. It was just as cold outside the door as it was inside. I've reached out to touch the door, but my fingers met cold air instead of wood. Please. The door was gone. It was because I was angry. Angry that some jerk would do this to me. Angry that I'd let him scare me. I was pissed. I quickened my step, then broke into a jog. When I reached our building, I slowed to a walk again, climbed the stairs, unlocked the door, closed the door behind me, and flipped on the lights. This time, though, I could feel the goosebumps prickling my arms. I stared at it for a second, then picked it up and answered. "Hello," I said. The phone was silent. Then I heard a deep voice that sounded eerily familiar say, "So you went for a run today?" I froze. "What, who's there?" The line was silent again. Then I heard the voice say, "You ran down the hill toward the river. You passed the wrought iron gate, didn't you?" I jumped and knocked the phone out of my hand. It hit the tile floor and slid under the cabinets. My heart was pounding in my chest. I crawled under the table to retrieve the phone. my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. When I turned to leave, my phone vibrated in my hand. I pulled it out and saw a voicemail from my girlfriend. She asked if I was almost home. Pa. I hadn't realized I'd been gone so long, so I told her I was just around the corner, almost there. I hung up and started walking home. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. Then I remembered the bakery I'd passed earlier, the one with the outdoor oven and the smell of fresh bread. I turned left and then another left onto the street where the bakery was. Boom! And sure enough, there it was, just like I remembered. Relief flooded me. I was almost home free. It was older, fancier houses, bigger yards. I walked past a wrought iron gate and stopped to admire a perfectly manicured rose bush. And that's when I heard it. Someone cleared their throat right behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off and continued on my way until I reached the river. Part and followed the path, taking in the crisp air, listening to the birds and watching the ducks swim. When I was done, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. Now, I knew my way around the city, but I'd never been here before. I checked my phone. No signal. Figures. I turned around and retraced my steps. I had to admit it was a little unnerving to be lost with no reception, but it wasn't enough to raise the hair on the back of my neck. That happened when I passed that same wrought iron gate. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I felt a chill run down my spine. Down the stairs I went, past the mirror, past the landing, past the half landing, past the steps that always creaked, past the second floor with its peeling paint and flickering light bulb, past the floorboards that sang when you walked on them, past the air vent that sounded like a jet engine, past the front door. Bah! I don't know, maybe a tree fell on the house or something. It was a perfect fall morning. Leaves crunching underfoot, birds chirping, the sun shining, the breeze rustling the leaves. It was beautiful, and I couldn't hear anything over the sound of the bird. So I shut the window back up, figuring it was just some construction or something. And I poured myself a bowl of cereal. It was in this old building in a historic part of town. You know how they always say, if you can afford to live in the city center, why would you want to live anywhere else? Well, we could barely afford the city center, but we made it work. There were 5 floors and an elevator that looked like it was designed by Escher, all angles and mirrors and moving walkways. Yeah, we weren't quite sure how that thing worked, so we just took the stairs. Our apartment was on the top floor, which meant 3 flights of stairs, every morning for coffee. The first few times I went down the stairs, I noticed this weird draft coming from the stairwell door on the ground floor. And each time I opened that door, it was colder outside the door than it was inside. As I'm lacing up my shoes, I heard my phone ring. I pulled it from my pocket and saw a voicemail from my brother. He's in basic training, so I figured he was calling to see if I had any cool Halloween candy he could trade for. We were pretty good about sending each other care packages while he was gone, so I answered. He said, "Yeah, listen, I wanted to ask you if you could send me some Mountain Dew and Reese's, but I actually called the wrong number. Sorry." And then he hung up. Weird. I thought maybe he was being haha funny, trying to see if I would bite. So I called back the number he'd called from. It was a local number. I didn't recognize it, but I answered anyway. All I heard was dial tone. Okay, weird, I thought. I went to check on my girlfriend. Now, there was nothing about the design of the door that would have made that possible. It was a standard, hollow core door. The kind that if you knock on it, it sounds like you're knocking on a cardboard box. So, I chalked it up to some trick of the wind. Just something to freak me out because I'm a jumpy guy. One Saturday morning, I got up early to go running. She was still sleeping peacefully. So, I tiptoed past the bed and went to the window. While I was eating, I started to plan out my run. I opened the door and stepped out onto the sidewalk, turned right, headed downhill. When I turned around to head home, I realized I had no idea where I was. Now, I didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but that relief disappeared when I heard that same clearing of a throat behind me. As I rounded the corner onto my street, my phone vibrated again. Another voicemail from my girlfriend. She sounded worried now. And that's when I heard it. The phone was ringing. It was sitting on a kitchen counter, its ringer vibrating the countertop. They sent a patrol car by just in case, but they didn't find anything. Then I heard a click. The phone clicked off the hook. I jumped and scrambled from under the table. It was almost like nothing had happened, except I could still feel the goosebumps on my arms, and the hair on the back of my neck was still standing on end. In the morning, I woke up to silence. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and I could hear birds chirping outside. That's when I heard the clearing of the throat behind me.